Place under orchid. Suddenly 100 roots will appear and bloom all 4 seasons. Hello, dear friends of earthly delights. If you've ever stood over a drooping houseplant wondering, what did I do wrong? Or whispered gentle apologies to a yellowing leaf, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Whether you're caring for a sun-drenched balcony jungle, a cozy windowsill herb corner, or that one stubborn orchid that just won't bloom again, this story is for you. You're the kind of person who sees plants not just as decoration, but as quiet companions. You talk to your greenery. You feel joy when a new leaf unfurls. You mourn a wilting stem like an old friend. Today, I want to take you on a journey, not just of how I rescued a seemingly lifeless orchid, but how that simple act reshaped how I see all indoor plants. There's a secret, a natural solution, that brought this forgotten plant back from the edge, and I'm going to show you every step. So grab your cup of tea, settle into your favorite green corner, and don't forget to subscribe to Earthly Delights, where your love for plants finds a voice and a community. Let's begin. The problem. Why most orchids fail in indoor gardens, and it's not your fault. You see, I used to think that orchids were just too delicate, too fussy, too high maintenance for the average indoor gardener. And maybe you've felt that way too. You followed every care instruction. You watered just enough. You gave it light, but not too much. Still, one day you walk past your orchid and notice the leaves are a little duller. The once vibrant blooms have wilted. The roots look like lifeless threads. And your heart sinks a little. You wonder, was it something I did? Did I forget something? Let me reassure you, most of the time, it's not your fault. Orchids, especially the popular Phalaenopsis, are tropical beauties trying to adapt to our living rooms, offices, and kitchen windows. And while they're incredibly resilient, they often suffer quietly before showing us signs of distress. By the time we notice it, the damage has already set in. Root rot, fertilizer burn, lack of airflow. One of the biggest hidden culprits? Inorganic fertilizer pellets and poor drainage. They sit silently beneath the surface, building up salts that slowly burn the roots from the inside out. But here's the good news. Just because your orchid looks like it's past saving doesn't mean it is. What I discovered next completely changed how I care for struggling plants. And today, I'm going to show you how to turn things around, naturally, gently, and with love. Let's move to the very first step in its revival, and maybe a revival of your green confidence too. Transformation begins. How I gave the orchid a second life. The first cut is the kindest. The orchid sat in my hands, fragile and faded, as if it had given up long before I found it. Its petals had fallen, its stem was dry and brittle, and yet, something in me refused to let it go. There's a moment, in every gardener's journey, where you stop seeing a plant as a project, and start seeing it as a life worth saving. I took a deep breath, gently unwrapped the pot, and held the roots like I was cradling something sacred. The first thing I did was trim off the old flower spike, crisp, shriveled, and long past its prime. It might seem sad, but that first cut is more than just pruning. It's a signal. It tells the plant, you no longer need to feed what's gone. It's time to start again. Much like us, plants grow best when they're not pouring their energy into things that no longer serve them. As I examined the roots, I noticed something troubling. Tiny green and gray pellets mixed into the soil. At first glance, they seemed harmless, but as I dug deeper, I realized they were synthetic fertilizers, left behind from past care. These slow-release granules, meant to help, had done more harm than good. They were the reason this orchid's roots were burned and brittle, unable to drink in the water or nutrients it so badly needed. It struck me then, even our best intentions, when not aligned with a plant's true nature, can cause slow and silent damage. So, I made a decision. No more artificial shortcuts. This orchid would be healed with care, not chemicals, with observation, not overcorrection. I carefully removed every last trace of fertilizer and washed the roots gently with water, clearing away the old, making space for the new. It felt like preparing a blank canvas, a moment of stillness before transformation. And now, with the damaged roots exposed and the burden of the past cut away, the real healing could begin. The root of the problem, saving the roots, the hidden key to orchid revival. As I looked closer, the truth became impossible to ignore. The orchid's roots, its very lifeline, were in crisis. Some were completely dry, shriveled like old parchment. Others were soft, brown, and mushy to the touch. No longer strong or supple. They could no longer do what roots are meant to do: anchor life, absorb nourishment, and quietly support growth from beneath the surface. In that moment, I realized something that every indoor gardener learns sooner or later. Healing begins at the root. No matter how beautiful the leaves once were, no matter how proud the bloom, if the roots are suffering, nothing else can truly thrive. So, with slow, steady hands, I began the delicate process of trimming away the damage. Each snip was like removing a memory of stress, a burden the plant no longer needed to carry. I made sure to leave only the firm, green, living roots, the ones still holding on, still reaching for life. It's strange how something as simple as pruning can feel so emotional. Because when you garden not just with your hands, but with your heart, even the smallest cut carries meaning. After trimming, I rinsed the roots gently with clear, cool water. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about renewal. I watched the old debris wash away, the stale remnants of neglect giving way to something clean, something full of potential. There's a quiet kind of hope that lives in moments like this. The orchid didn't ask for a second chance, but it accepted it, quietly, willingly, just like so many of us do when we're shown a little patience and care. And now, with the roots cleansed and the weight of decay lifted, it was time to offer the plant the one thing that could tip the scales from survival to revival. What came next was nature's answer to nourishment, pure, powerful, and surprisingly simple. The secret sauce, the natural elixir, honey plus aloe vera plus vitamin B1. In the quiet moments after cleansing the roots, I stood still, asking myself, what does this orchid truly need now? And the answer came not from a garden store shelf or a chemical bottle, but from the heart of nature itself. First, I reached for a jar of honey, golden, rich, and filled with life. Honey isn't just sweet, it's antibacterial, antifungal, and packed with natural enzymes. For plants, it's like a healing balm, protecting delicate tissues and gently encouraging root growth without overwhelming them. I took just 1 teaspoon and stirred it into a liter of clean water, watching the liquid swirl into something soft and nurturing, light enough to be absorbed, yet powerful enough to spark life. Next came aloe vera, a single thick, green leaf cut fresh from my windowsill. Inside was a gel so cooling, so full of moisture and trace minerals, that even the driest roots seemed to respond like they've been given a second chance. I sliced the leaf open, scooped out the gel, and blended it with a bit of water until it became smooth and silky. As the blender hummed softly, I couldn't help but think, how often do we overlook what's already in our homes? Already in nature, just waiting to help us and our plants grow? Finally, I added a few drops of vitamin B1, often underestimated, but deeply essential. It's the quiet guardian of recovery, helping plants bounce back from stress, shock, and transplanting. With just a touch, the elixir was complete: honey for healing, aloe for moisture, and B1 for strength. This mixture wasn't just nourishment, it was love in liquid form. And as I poured it into a shallow bowl, ready to welcome the orchid's roots, I felt a quiet excitement rise. This wasn't just about saving one plant. It was about remembering that the most powerful solutions often come from the simplest sources. And now, the orchid was ready to drink in everything it had been waiting for. Ritual of restoration, soaking in healing, letting the orchid rest and recharge. There's something almost sacred about this next part. No rush, no force, just stillness and surrender. I gently lowered the orchid's freshly trimmed roots into the bowl of warm, golden elixir. The water shimmered faintly with the mix of honey, aloe vera, and vitamin B1, 3 quiet healers meeting the roots where they were, without expectation, only offering what they had. As the orchid soaked, I sat beside it, watching the way its roots began to soften, expand, slowly taking the moisture like a weary traveler sipping water after a long journey. You could almost feel the tension leaving the plant, as if it finally understood it was safe now. For 20 minutes, I let it rest, not just to hydrate or absorb nutrients, but to pause, Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give to any living being, plant, person, or pet, is a moment of true rest. In this moment of stillness, I thought of all the times I had tried to fix a struggling plant too quickly, rushing for results, forgetting that nature doesn't work on our schedule. Orchids, like us, thrive when they are allowed to breathe. And when the soaking was done, I lifted the orchid carefully, like lifting something that had just remembered how to live again. The roots were fuller, more pliable. The transformation had begun, not loudly, but deeply. It was a small ritual, yes, but in that simple act of soaking, something had shifted, not just in the orchid, but in me. Because care, real care, is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters, with presence, with intention, and with love. And now, the orchid was ready for a fresh start in a new home. New beginnings, replanting with purpose, creating the right environment. With the orchid's roots soaked in healing, nourished and renewed, it was time for the next step, a fresh start. There's something symbolic about repotting a plant. It's not just a shift of soil or a change of container. It's an invitation. Welcome home. Here, you can grow freely again. I chose a small clay pot with ample drainage, something humble, but breathable, where water could flow and air could reach the roots. Orchids may look regal, but what they truly crave is simplicity, a space that supports, not suffocates. Instead of regular potting mix, I reached for something gentle and natural, moss. Soft, spongy, alive with subtle texture. Moss cradles orchid roots like a mother's hand. It holds moisture without drowning. It breathes without drying, and it supports without pressing too hard. I wrapped the orchid's roots in a layer of this moss, carefully tucking them into their new nest. No force, just guidance. Every bit of placement done with quiet mindfulness. And as I pressed the final strands of moss around the base, I felt that soft sense of peace only gardeners know. The peace of beginnings. The peace of letting go of what was, and nurturing what's next. Because here's the truth. Plants don't ask for perfection. They ask for presence. And the right environment isn't always the biggest or fanciest. It's the one that honors the plant's natural rhythm. With the orchid now settled into its new pot, the hardest part was behind us. But to truly thrive, it needed consistency, not just care. And so, a new rhythm was about to begin, one that would feed the roots, nourish the leaves, and carry this orchid from survival into full, vibrant life. A routine of gentle care, the 10-day rule, a ritual that revives more than just plants. With the orchid now tucked gently into its new moss-lined home, it wasn't just a matter of waiting, it was a matter of rhythm. Because healing isn't a one-time act, it's a practice, a promise we make again and again. And that's where the 10-day rule begins. Every 10 days, I return to my little orchid, not in panic, not in urgency, but with calm consistency. I prepare a fresh batch of the honey, aloe, and vitamin B1 elixir. Just like before, this time, not to rescue, but to nurture, to remind the orchid that the support hasn't disappeared now that it's looking better. It's a quiet ritual. I pour the mixture slowly at the base, letting the moss gently soak it in. I watch the droplets weave their way through the roots. And in that moment, I feel grounded too. There's something so intimate about this kind of care. It's not about results, it's about connection. About showing up even when the leaves look fine. Because that's how real growth works, steady, subtle, and built on trust. And here's the beautiful part. This rhythm, it starts to affect you too. You begin to see that tending to a plant every 10 days is also a way of tending to yourself. A reminder to pause, to breathe, to check in with something fragile, something growing, something alive. This ritual, this rhythm, it's more than just good orchid care. It's a gentle awakening. And over time, both you and your plant begin to flourish in ways you didn't even expect. The power of light, finding the light, where growth truly begins. Once the roots were nourished and the care routine gently in place, there remained one essential element that no mixture, no water, no nutrient could replace: light. But not just any light. Orchids, especially when grown indoors, don't ask for harsh midday sun or intense beams beating through the glass. What they seek is gentleness, a quiet, steady glow. like early morning sunlight warming a windowsill or late afternoon rays brushing against the leaves. So I found a soft corner in my home where the light filtered in just enough. I placed the orchid there, not hidden, not exposed, just supported. And you know what happened next? Not much, not at first. There was no sudden bloom, no dramatic transformation overnight, but slowly, subtly, the leaves began to regain their strength. The roots thickened, and one day, almost without warning, a tiny bud began to form. That's the quiet miracle of light. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it simply offers what it has, consistently, and lets the plant decide when it's ready to grow. There's something deeply human in that too, isn't there? We all have our own kind of light, the energy we absorb from rest, from relationships, from moments of peace, and just like plants, we thrive not in extremes, but in balance. So if your orchid isn't blooming yet, don't despair. Let the light do its work. Let it whisper, not scream. Let it remind you, day by day, that growth begins not with pressure, but with presence. Because in the end, the most important growth doesn't start in the soil, it starts in the light. Sharing the goodness. Don't stop with one, help other plants thrive too. After seeing what just a little care, a little light, and a humble natural elixir could do for one forgotten orchid, I looked around at the rest of my green companions. My pothos, my peace lily, even that quiet little fern in the corner that always seemed to ask for so little. I had leftover solution from the mixture, still fresh, still potent, still pulsing with the soft power of honey, aloe, and vitamin B1, and in that moment, it felt almost wrong to keep it to myself. Healing, after all, was never meant to be a secret. So I walked from plant to plant, letting each one receive just a taste. A few drops on the roots here, a gentle mist across the leaves there. No urgency, no expectation, just a simple gesture of shared goodness. And over the next few weeks, I watched as tiny transformations took shape. New growth peeked from familiar stems. Leaves perked up, roots strengthened. It was as though they, too, had heard the whisper. You are seen, you are cared for, you are safe to grow. That's the quiet beauty of gardening. It teaches us that what nurtures one life can often nourish many. One act of care ripples outward, touching everything nearby, just like kindness, just like love. So the next time you mix up your orchid tonic, don't stop with just one pot. Offer a little to the rest of your garden, indoor or out. Because sometimes, the greatest harvest is not in blooms, but in connection. And your plants, though silent, will always show you how much they notice. The bloom, the return of life, roots, leaves, and new blooms. Weeks passed, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the quiet rhythm that only nature knows. And then, one morning, I noticed something, a tiny green point pushing its way out from the base of the orchid. At first glance, it looked like just another leaf, but it wasn't. It was a bud, a new bloom. I leaned in close, hardly daring to breathe. There it was, delicate, determined, alive. The orchid, once wilted and discarded, was preparing to flower again. And not just that, new roots were stretching confidently into the moss. The leaves had taken on a richer, deeper green. The whole plant had a quiet vitality, a kind of glow that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving, and I couldn't help but smile. Because this wasn't just about the orchid. It was about what's possible when we don't give up, when we slow down, observe, and offer gentle, consistent care, whether to a plant, a relationship, or even ourselves. Sometimes, the return of life is not loud. Sometimes, it begins with one soft bud, a new leaf, a subtle shift in color. But in those tiny changes, hope blooms. That orchid reminded me of something we often forget. The things we nurture quietly are often the ones that reward us most deeply. Growth doesn't always come with fanfare, but it always comes when we meet it with patience and love. And as that first bloom opened, petals wide, color vibrant, scent faint but sweet, I knew this wasn't just a flower. It was a sign that everything we pour into the world, every act of care, every whisper of encouragement, returns to us, multiplied, softened, and blooming in its own time. The reflection. Lessons from the orchid. Growth takes time. not perfection. As I watched that orchid begin to flourish, something shifted inside me. I had started this journey thinking I was saving a plant. But somewhere along the way, I realized it was saving me, too. Because the orchid didn't rush. It didn't bloom on command. It didn't perform for applause. It simply responded to care, to presence, to time, and slowly, in its own quiet way, it came back to life. Isn't that what we all need sometimes? To know that it's okay to pause. That healing doesn't have to be instant. That growth, real, lasting growth, rarely happens all at once. Like the orchid, we may go through seasons where we shed old petals, where we feel dry at the roots, where we're unsure if we'll ever bloom again. But given the right light, a bit of love, and the space to rest, we do. This plant taught me that perfection isn't the goal. Presence is. Noticing the tiny changes, celebrating a single new leaf, trusting that the effort we put in, no matter how small, matters. You don't need to be a master gardener to make something thrive. You just need to show up, again and again, with gentle hands and a willing heart. And maybe that's the truest lesson of all. Nature doesn't demand that we be perfect. It simply invites us to be patient. Join the green awakening. If this story stirred something in you, if you found a little bit of yourself in this orchid's quiet comeback, then I want to invite you into something more. Because Earthly Delights isn't just a channel. It's a gathering place, a sanctuary for those who feel most at peace with soil beneath their nails, sunlight on their shoulders, and the silent company of leaves that grow with us. So share your story. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever brought a plant back from the edge? Or maybe, are you that plant right now? Looking for light, for breath, for a little encouragement? Let this be the beginning of your own green awakening. And if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe. Not just to follow videos, but to follow a rhythm. One that keeps you connected to nature, to growth, and to yourself. Here, every seed matters, every effort counts, and no leaf goes unnoticed. So come along, let's grow something beautiful together. The garden is listening. As this story draws to a close, I want to leave you with this gentle truth. The garden is always listening. Even when you say nothing, even when your hands are still and your heart feels heavy, it hears you in your quiet efforts, in your patient watering, in the way you move a pot toward the sun without fanfare. It hears you every time you choose to care, even when the results aren't immediate. Every drop you give, every root you tend, every moment you spend in the company of leaves and soil, it's all a kind of prayer. A whisper to the universe that says, I believe in life. I believe in healing. I believe in the power of slow miracles. And the garden, in its own silent language, always answers, maybe not with words, but with signs, a soft unfurling, a new bud, a brighter green, a tiny shift that says, keep going, you're not alone. Thank you for sharing this moment with me, here on Earthly Delights. Whether you're tending to orchids, nurturing a backyard sanctuary, or simply learning to care again, know this, you are part of something growing, something good. Until we meet again, keep your heart rooted, your hands open, and your eyes turned gently toward the light. See you soon.